Tyrrhenian River National Park. Let's see if that is the correct answer. Tubataha Reefs Natural Park. So you can get the idea from the picture beside the question. That is actually the picture of the said protected area. Palawan Biosphere Reserve. Okay, let's see. Mount Mantalingahan Protected Landscape. Another answer again, Palawan Biosphere Reserve. Okay, I think someone got the correct answer. Yes, it's Mount Mantalingahan Protected Landscape. So Mount Mantalingahan is also considered as a key biodiversity area, hosting denizens of plants and animals. It is one of only 10 sites of the Alliance for Extinction in the Philippines and one of the 11 important bird areas in Palawan. Most of the threatened and restricted range birds of the Palawan endemic bird area occur in the Mount Mantalingahan Range and the adjacent lowlands. Okay. Okay, so the winner for this one is it's Mr. Wilson Barbon. So he will know it immediately. Congratulations, sir. Okay, for the next question, and this is the last one. So which protected area in Caraga spans the South Diwata Range and Eastern Mindanao Biodiversity Corridor, protecting some of Mindanao's last remaining lowland dipterocarp forests? So what do you think is this important protected area? Let's see. Mount Hamigitan Range Wildlife Sanctuary, Agusan Marsh Wildlife Sanctuary, Tinuyan Falls Protected Landscape. Okay. So you can guess what protected area are we referring to? Let's see, Siargao Islands Protected Landscape. It could be since it's part of Caraga. But the correct answer is yes, it's Tinuyan Falls Protected Landscape in Surigao del Sur. So congratulations, Miss Monica Gibe. So you got the right answer. So for the winners, Mr. Kyle will send you a private message to ask for your GCash accounts. Okay, so I know everyone is excited to learn from this webinar, but we can still wait a bit for others to join. We are now participated by 101 partners. So we again look forward to having more of you. So a gentle reminder to complete the INREM 360 vibe, don't forget to use the official Zoom background found in the chat box. We will be starting in a while, so feel free to take a quick break or invite your colleagues to join us, and we'll see you in a few minutes. science and evidence based, community driven, and future focused. This is INREM 360 webinar series where evidence meets experience in natural resource and environment management. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the sixth installment of INREM 360. I am Bella Catuccio, your host for this afternoon. So the INREM 360 webinar brings together key insights from research, practice, and field experiences of UPLB-INREM, and including its partner institutions. Today, we will zoom in one of the pressing concerns being addressed by the French Development Agency funded Technical Assistance on Climate Change Action Program, and that is the development of protected areas as carbon sequestration zones. To officially open our session and highlight the crucial role of having this collaboration, we are honored to hear the opening remarks from our esteemed Assistant Director of the Biodiversity Management Bureau, Ms. Mariglo Rosaida Lariri.
Good afternoon, everyone. So this is Ryan Kwanan from the National Parks Division of the Biodiversity Management Bureau. And on behalf of our Assistant Director, Mariglo Rosaida Laririt, we warmly welcome you to this very important webinar with a theme from protection to stewardship, the future of Philippine protected areas through carbon finance. So this is a very timely webinar because we have various initiatives towards carbon financing in relation to biodiversity conservation. Protected areas remain at the heart of biodiversity conservation in our country. And our protected area system, the National Integrated Protected Area System, safeguards forests, our watersheds, coastal and marine ecosystems, and habitat that sustain countless species, including our endemic and threatened biodiversity. But beyond ecological values, these landscapes provide water security, climate regulation, disaster risk reduction, the food system support, and livelihoods for communities living within and around them. Yet we recognize the reality confronting of these protected areas. Despite major milestones under the NIPAS, our protected areas continue to face challenges from deforestation and habitat degradation to land use pressures, the climate impacts, as well as the limited financing and the increasing demand for more inclusive governance. As stewards of biodiversity, we know that conservation cannot rely solely on protection measures. Conservation must also be supported by sustainable financing mechanisms and stronger community participation. This is why the Biodiversity Management Bureau continue to pursue strategies that strengthen protected area governance and improve community participation in the protected area management and diversify sustainable financing options for our protected areas. At present, the Biodiversity Management Bureau, is advancing initiatives that support biodiversity conservation alongside long-term ecological and financial sustainability, beginning with the review of the expanded NIPAS Act and the formulation of needed policies. We continue strengthening protected area management boards, improving management effectiveness, and expanding community-based ecotourism and the biodiversity-friendly enterprises. We are also exploring innovative financing mechanisms that can sustain conservation gains beyond traditional public funding. One emerging opportunities is the carbon finance. The Philippines possesses protected landscapes and seascapes with immense ecological importance and significant carbon sequestration potential. Properly designed carbon initiatives can create opportunities to strengthen conservation outcomes while also generating benefits for local communities and the indigenous peoples and the local stakeholders who have long served as partners in resource stewardship. However, we recognize that Preparing protected areas for carbon projects requires careful groundwork. Carbon finance is not simply about generating carbon credits. It requires science-based baselines, robust monitoring systems, sound governance mechanisms, social safeguards, community participation, and benefit sharing considerations and alignment with the
Siya pala yung
biodiversity
speaker.
conservation. This is precisely why the Biodiversity Management Bureau is actively supporting preparatory work to improve readiness of protected areas for future opportunities, particularly on carbon. Through initiatives such as the Climate Change Action Program or CCCAP Component 1, we will work with partners to establish foundational systems necessary to position national parks as carbon sequestration zones. These efforts include carbon stock assessments and baseline development, capacity building and monitoring on ecological modeling, integration of social and community dimensions, policy analysis, and development of pilot approaches that can guide future implementation. Equally important, the BMB recognizes that carbon initiatives must strengthen, not replace, the fundamental objectives of protected area management. Carbon should become additional driver that reinforces biodiversity conservation, ecosystem resilience, and community well-being. Our vision is not merely protected areas that store carbon. Our vision is protected areas that remain ecologically resilient, socially inclusive, and financially sustainable. Protected areas where conservation and community development move together. This webinar, these discussions we will have today is therefore timely and important as the country moves towards strengthening climate action commitments and developing pathways aligned with emerging carbon market opportunities. Conservations like this help Conversations like this can help ensure that policy, the science, communities, and conservation practice advance together. We thank the organizer, the UPLB-INREM, AFD, CIRAD, and all our partners for initiating this platform for learning and collaboration. May today's discussions generate ideas, partnerships, and practical pathways that will help shape the future of the Philippine protected areas, from protection toward long-term stewardship. Maraming salamat po, and on behalf of the Biodiversity Management Bureau of the DNR, we wish everyone a productive webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sir Ryan, for gracing our webinar this afternoon. And I couldn't agree more that this is a timely webinar. And one of the remarkable things said by Sir Ryan are first, conservation must be partnered with sustainable financing mechanism and community participation. And second is carbon finance requires a careful groundwork. And I know we will learn more about these things. So to hear a message of support, help me welcome Mr. Gauthier Calder, Senior Operations Manager of the French Development Agency.
Thank you, Lan, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a real honor for me to deliver you those few words on behalf of the French Development Agency. Carbon finance indeed has been a key component of the CCAP program, the Climate Change Action Program, co-financed by Asian Development Bank, AFD, and JICA since 2021. Through this progressive policy-based loan, AFD and its co-financers have supported the government of the Philippines in developing and implementing a comprehensive policy framework aimed at addressing climate change in the country. Within this framework, forest management constitutes a key element. Forestry and other land use, for example, has been now integrated in the proposed nationally determined contribution. And in fact, FOLU represents the largest quantitative target for greenhouse gas emission reductions or avoidance compared to the business as usual scenario, even beyond the energy sector. According to the draft report, we're now talking about 700 million tons of CO2 emissions that could be avoided by maximizing the country's carbon sink potential. In addition to the NDC, of course, as it was presented, the government is also working to establish carbon market policy frameworks, including the development of the necessary institutional governance mechanism. The Department of Environment and Natural Resources, for instance, recently issued an administrative order on the establishment, registration, and monitoring of voluntary forest carbon credit projects in forest land protected areas and ancestral domains. So yes, a lot of work has been done now to reintegrate the topic of forests within the climate change action plan and policies. But of course, when we talk about forestry, protected area constitute a topic in its own right. Under the direct mandate of the national government, protected areas could play indeed an important role in establishing the principle for advancing carbon sequestration in the country, as carbon finance could not only support the management of existing protected area, it also have to take into consideration the question of biodiversity restoration and the social implications of such projects in the management of protected areas. So just to conclude, I would like to we're really therefore grateful that AFD has been able to support technical assistance initiative led by UPLB and CIRAD, the French Public Research Center, to provide evidence-based recommendations to the government on how to approach carbon finance in those areas, taking into consideration those different aspects. So I would like to thank particularly the organizer, UPLB-INREM, for organizing this webinar and providing a platform for the wider dissemination of the first research outputs. And I wish everyone an insightful webinar and fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Caller, and thank you so much for the overwhelming support from our AFD partners. So we kindly invite everyone to please turn on their cameras for a quick photo opportunity. So please use the in-room Zoom background. Okay. So please hold your smiles as we capture each slide. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Please hold your smiles. Okay. Okay, next page. Okay, thank you so much for all the bright smiles. So again, a few reminders as you listen, please make sure your microphones are muted. Feel free as well to drop your questions in the Q&A box. And if you're watching via live stream, please use the hashtag INREM360. Again, for a more INREM 360 vibe, please use the INREM 360 Zoom background in the chat box. And kindly rename your accounts as follows: your name underscore the institution where you are affiliated. So, let us now dive into the main part of this webinar. Our speaker for this afternoon is a distinguished forestry professional who earned his Bachelor of Science in Forestry in 1998 and passed the forestry licensure examination that same year, placing among the top 10 examinees nationwide. He began his professional career with the Tribal Cooperation for Rural Development or TRICORD, a local non-government organization in Nueva Vizcaya, where he spent more than a year contributing to rural development initiatives and community-based programs. Building on this experience, he ventured into forest surveying at the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, or DNR Regional Office in Pampanga. After 2 years of service, he joined the National Mapping and Resource Information Authority, or NAMRIA, as a remote sensing technologist, a position he held for an impressive 15 years. Currently, he is the OIC Section Chief of the Protected Area Community Management and Sustainable Financing Section of the National Parks Division of BMP. Partners, without further ado, let us welcome Mr. Reneo Vicente.
Yes. Thank you, Miss Wella, and thank you, UPLB-INREM, the French Embassy, and the CRED for having a BMB today to impart our programs or what we are doing in terms of preparing the Philippine protected areas for carbon projects. And we also thank you for having the Upper Marikina River Basin protected landscape as a project site for the CCCAP project on Component 1 on developing protected areas as carbon sequestration zones. So this afternoon, I'll be discussing the topic, the future of Philippine PAs through carbon finance, leveraging nature-based finance for biodiversity conservation and climate action. So let me share my slide. Can you already see my screen? Present.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let me proceed. So maybe most of us are already familiar or we are already aware that the Philippines is one of the most diverse countries in the world where the endemicity of species is so dense. And it's also known that the Philippines is one of the hottest of the hot spots, meaning the loss of biodiversity in the country is so fast that the nature cannot really cope up. And so, despite this uh, with these happenings or with the situation, we are fast losing the ecosystem services that these protected areas and the environment provide. So we know that biodiversity, the forests provide services in terms of carbon sequestration and storage, of course, water regulation. They provide water, but they also help regulate and clean the water. Disaster risk reduction. So that's one of the areas where the nature and biodiversity provides much ecosystem services. Also, in terms of livelihood support. At the BMB, we are promoting the biodiversity friendly enterprises, where we strive to mainstream biodiversity in the way how communities uh, do their livelihood activities to make it nature-based and to make it sustainable. So, on the current status of our protected areas, we are at 251, and these 251 protected areas can be disaggregated into 117 initial components. 13 are proclaimed under the NIPAS, and 121 are already legislated. So when we say legislated, these are the protected areas that have already undergone enactment by Congress. So these areas are already classified as national parks. The proclaimed protected areas are established by the president through to a presidential proclamation, and they are placed under the management of the NIPAS as a framework. The initial components refers to the watershed forest reserves, game refuge and bird sanctuaries, wildlife sanctuaries or wilderness areas, and mangrove swamp forest reserves that were established by the president before the NIPAS Act was established in 1992. So these initial components are undergoing different activities on establishment. beginning with the protected area suitability analysis, public consultation, the preparation of final technical description, until the issuance of a proclamation by the president or a congressional action by the Congress. If we look at the land area of the protected areas, we have a total of almost 7.9 million hectares, which can be divided into 4.6 million hectares for uh, terrestrial areas and almost 3.3 million hectares for coastal and marine areas. Currently, we are doing or we are working on establishing the completion of the establishment process for the 117 initial components. We have already conducted the workshops for the finalization of their boundaries, and we will be working towards uh, establishing or preparing a draft bill for these protected areas or draft presidential proclamations. But even if we have this number, there are lots of proposals for the establishment of additional protected areas outside of this initial component. Actually, we have new protected areas that were not initially or that were not part of the initial component. One example is the uh, Mount Masaraga in Region 5. We have Mount Sotut in Tarlac. So that's the first protected area in Tarlac for those of us here who hails from Tarlac and counting. So we have so many challenges in protected areas, as my boss, Chief Ryan, mentioned a little while ago, that there are many challenges in protected areas, and I know most of you are aware of this. You know, Chocolate Hills, you know, Senior Aguila in Siplas, and you know, Masungi. So those are protected areas, and uh, we can see that most of those conflicts arising from protected areas are due to development projects and also from pressures from the communities. So the group of Senior Aguilar is a group of communities wanting to convert the protected area or portion of the protected area into their permanent homes. But there are also private companies wanting to establish large-scale development projects in protected areas. There are benefits from the entry of development projects in protected areas, but our challenge is to balance the entry of these projects with the main objective of NIPAS, which is protection and conservation of biodiversity. So we may be addressing some of the concerns on financing, but still the income brought by development projects or special use projects, special use agreement and protected areas, or SAPA. So this is the instrument issued by protected areas for development projects. While they may be bringing in income for protected areas, these are not enough. So financing is still a challenge because uh, budget, as you know, is one of the problem of the government. We may be able, or the DNR may be able to provide the budget for the conduct of assessments like the biodiversity assessment and monitoring system, the biodiversity monitoring system, the survey and registration of protected area occupants, as well as the socioeconomic assessments, impact impact assessments. But the budget that is given to DNR is not enough to implement the protected area management plans of each individual protected area. And uh, this should be prioritized because this is where the activities on conservation and protection is focused on. So we also have to contend with the increase of uh, salaries of staffs, but we also need to enjoin or recruit people to man our protected areas. Another is we also need to support the local communities to in order for them to implement their number one is their community resource management plans for the Pakbarma holders, and also to help the communities in their livelihood to ease pressure on the biodiversity. We are dependent really on government appropriations. That's why this the discussion on carbon finance and the possible entry of carbon projects in protected areas will really help the management of protected areas. We have integrated protected area funds. So that is where all the income of protected areas are deposited. But this is not enough given the number of protected areas we have. As I've mentioned, we have 251 and counting. So this lack of finance is being worsened by growing management costs because the value of peso in 2010 is not the same as in 2020. We also have we also need to contend with the increasing needs for restoration because of the increasing areas that is being opened up for different livelihood activities. So with all these areas that we need to cater to, we really need a strong source of financing for us to really meet the objective of biodiversity conservation. So the protected areas are uh, well positioned for for the carbon market. One provision is the NIPAS Act itself, because under the statement of the policy, it recognizes that the conservation is or cannot be handled by the government alone, and we need the different partners, the stakeholders. And when it comes to carbon projects, this will not be the DNR only, but we will need investors, we will need the community, we will need third-party validators, and so we will need everyone's help. Another framework is the PENCAS Act, where we can leverage the value or valuation of protected areas. Next is the Department Administrative Order 2026-2 on the voluntary carbon market roadmap for 2026 to 2023. So we hope to position protected areas as potential sites for carbon projects. DAO 2026-05, establishment, registration, and monitoring of voluntary carbon credit projects. Under this policy, it included protected areas and national parks as one of the areas where carbon projects may be implemented. So aside from those legal frameworks, the protected areas offer natural assets where where carbon projects may be implemented. So we have natural forests, mangroves, peatlands, forest restoration sites, or carbon ecosystems, coastal ecosystems, sorry, and landscapes and seascapes. So uh, we have blue carbon, green carbon. So the protected areas have these assets that can be offered for future carbon projects. So for potential carbon pathways and opportunities, as I've mentioned, um, we have lots of protected areas of forests, mangroves, and we can one of the areas is the enhancement of existing forest in terms of protection and conservation to ensure that this continuously sequester carbon and to avoid degradation or denudation. Another potential pathway is through blue carbon initiatives. Recently, there was an agreement that all mangrove forests will be put under the management of the Biodiversity Management Bureau. And currently, we have the Coastal and Marine Division at the Biodiversity Management Bureau, and the Ocean Environment Task Force is also attached in the Bureau, which can help in blue carbon initiatives. Another is the implementation of forest rehabilitation and restoration plan. We are preparing a administrative order for the implementation of a rehabilitation and restoration program for protected areas. So this is taking off from the national greening program, but instead of just planting, uh, our program or the restoration program will be more on restoring the forest ecosystems in the protected areas. So yeah, we have this upcoming policies on carbons in uh, protected areas, policies to support carbon in protected areas. So as I've mentioned, the guidelines on the implementation of ecosystem rehabilitation and restoration in protected areas, and another guidelines in the issuance of restoration agreement in protected areas. So the carbon projects or carbon proponents are looking at a long-term vehicle, an assurance that they can uh, establish forest carbon projects with the assurance that these areas will be sustained, or the plants, the trees will not be cut down. So these two policies will really address those concerns of carbon forest proponents or carbon project proponents. So let me discuss these policies in a more detail. So the Forest Ecosystem Rehabilitation and Restoration program will be applied in proclaimed protected areas, in initial components of the NIPAS, for legislated protected areas, including other conservation areas. When we say other conservation areas or OECM, we refer to critical habitat, we refer to indigenous community conserved areas, to local community managed conservation areas, including uh, LMMPA or locally managed marine protected areas. So we have several guiding principles in the conduct of the forest ecosystem rehabilitation and restoration. And number one is the ecological integrity. Two is primacy of endemic and or indigenous species. So we will really uh, observe the planting of endemic and indigenous species, preferably uh, critically endangered species that are present in those respective protected areas. Number three is soil and water conservation. Fourth is climate change adaptation and mitigation. Fifth, ecological connectivity. Though these areas may be outside the protected areas, but we are looking at issuing subsequent policies to ensure that these ecological connectivities will help bridge the gaps between protected areas. Number six guiding principle is nature-based solutions. Seventh is multi-stakeholder collaboration and sustainability and long-term viability. We also have prescribed different approaches. Number one is the assisted natural regeneration or ENR. This is the number one methodology, and most likely this will have wide adoption in the protected areas. Another is the rainforestation farming, the enrichment planting, the Miyawaki method, ecological mangrove restoration, and the natural recovery. By the way, the assisted natural regeneration involves uh, making use or taking advantage of existing wildlings or saplings growing in the protected areas. So if we have a restoration area that is degraded and vegetated with pogons or grasses, then ANR involves liberating or cleaning these wildlings in order for them to survive. The rainforestation involves planting mixed and diversified species mirroring a rainforest, but annual rain, uh, but fruit trees or perennial crops, yeah, perennial crops can be integrated in this rainforest farms. Enrichment planting can be applied in areas where there are monoculture trees. For the Miyawaki method, this can be applied in rural areas, and this involves planting dense species of uh, trees for the ecological mangrove restoration. So this will be implemented in mangrove areas, and this will address the flow of water and will encourage the natural recruitment of propagules or seeds coming from nearby areas. Of course, the natural recovery is or similar to a do nothing approach where you just protect the area from human activities like fire or gathering of resources and let nature recover by itself. Okay, the uniqueness of the rehabilitation and restoration program is the use of reference ecosystem. So we'll not just be planting trees, but we will look at a reference ecosystem that will serve as a reference in terms of the manner of planting and what should be the appropriate species that should be planted. So we also need to consider the type of forests in selecting species that should be planted. Okay, I've mentioned that strictly we will only be planting endemic and indigenous trees in the restoration areas. So in terms of implementation, our number one or preferred approach is by administration. So unlike the National Greening Program, where it is or we deal with the people's organization under the implementation by administration, it will be the DNR, specifically the Protected Area Management Offices, that will implement the restoration program. But of course, we will need the local communities as workers. Another Another okay, I've missed another slide, but another methodology of implementation is through partnership with the private sectors, including forest carbon proponents. So the plan is to have the private sectors or proponents to implement portion or all of the restoration plans that will be prepared by the protected areas. And we are looking at benefit sharing, not necessarily uh, a resource use fee like the specialist agreement in protected areas. Currently, there are many interested applicants who wish to enter into carbon projects in protected areas, but they are apprehensive because of the rate of the specialist agreement in protected areas. And so we are actually fast tracking the preparation of the uh, policy on the issuance of the restoration agreement in protected areas for this for the projects on carbon to materialize, because currently with the rate of the SAPA, it's really not feasible for carbon projects to enter. But this diagram just shows the overall cycle on the forest rehabilitation and restoration program. So we start with the site identification, mainly identifying where are the degraded and the denuded areas based on the protected area management plan, based on the areas that were surveyed, mapped and planned under the NGP. We also look at expired tenure instruments, including abandoned and utilized fish ponds, wildlife corridors, and undeveloped portions of protected areas. So under site assessment, uh, one of the purpose of the site assessment is to establish the number of wildlings or regenerants that will be supplemented under the assisted natural regeneration or supplemental planting scheme. Next is we need to select a reference ecosystem, and we can do this by a focus group discussion with the local communities who are familiar with the area. The communities know the history of the restoration areas. They know when it was degraded. They know what is the appearance of the area long before it was degraded. So after that, we go to the writing of the rehabilitation and the restoration plan, to the approval of the plan, and the implementation. So that's the overall process for the rehabilitation and restoration planning and protected areas until implementation. Okay. This is my last slide, and this refers to the proposed policy on the issuance of an agreement for restoration, where proponents may also apply for projects pertaining to forest carbon projects. So the proposed provisions will be about the protection, conservation, rehabilitation, and restoration purpose. And the terms will be 25 years, but it will be automatically renewable for 25 years. And another salient feature is the user fee, maybe in the form of benefit sharing agreement, probably in the form of PES, carbon offset, or biodiversity credits. And the benefit sharing rate will be determined later through a policy, or if not, it will be determined between the Protected Area Management Board and the proponent following a guidance, maybe in the form of administrative order that may be issued by the DNR later. So this is where my presentation ends, and I hope that everyone gets something. And I will be open for questions if you have lots of questions. Thank you, and returning it back to Miss Wella. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Sir Reneo. Thank you. And I agree, they already have a lot of questions. But yes, sir, I agree that for the carbon financing in the Philippines to take off, we have to ensure that the integrity of our forest in terms of providing the ecosystem services, for instance, in this aspect or in this context, is carbon sequestration. So hence the importance of the upcoming policies that you have mentioned, the guidelines on the ecosystem rehabilitation and restoration, including the issuance of the RAPA or the restoration agreement in PAs. So before we hear the feedback from our carbon experts, may we again invite everyone to please turn on your cameras. We observe that we have also increased in number, and we are now enjoined by the complete set of our speakers. So once again, please bear with us. Please show us again your bright smiles. Okay, so we have six sets. So kindly turn on your cameras. Okay. So for the first slide, please show us your smiles. Okay. One, two, three. Okay, please hold your smiles. Let us go to the next page. Okay. One, two, three. Ayan. Okay, for the third slide. Okay, one, two, three. Okay. So again, thank you so much for all the bright smiles. And at this point, we will part first your questions to hear the feedback. Oh, we still have the fourth, sorry. Okay, we are now on the fourth slide. Okay, now on the fifth. And lastly, for the sixth set. Okay, thank you so much once again. So, at this point, we will park your questions to hear first the feedback from our carbon experts. They have been involved in the implementation of carbon projects within the protected area. So they will share their insights, experiences, and feedback on these initiatives. So let's start and join me in learning from one of our experts, Mr. Wilson John Barbon of Conservation International.
Okay, let me just thank you, INREM, for inviting me, CI, to share our views on this topic. So I have a slide to share. So give me a couple of minutes to figure out this slide. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, strengthening carbon finance. Yeah, the title page. So I prepared a few slides for this, for this reaction, and I'll start with some basic about, how carbon finance, how carbon credits actually work. And I think this is just a figure I took off the internet of carbon neg, but this is a good representation of what are different types of carbon projects, carbon credits are. So the first set of carbon credits you can expect would be the avoidance. So when you prevent emissions, like coal power plant, you shut them down, replace it with solar power plants, then you avoid emissions, therefore you can earn credits. So the box here with the broken lines, the not emitted, is what is the credits you earn. So for example, because you did an action, you avoided emitting carbon dioxide to the atmosphere this much, this ganito kadami, this is how much carbon you have avoided by doing something, then that is your credit. So that's usually the avoidance. And in the forestry sector, like protected areas, when you avoidance can be in the form of like you don't cut those trees, right? Because when you cut a tree through, let's say, burning, you clear a land, you replace it with agriculture activities, you are actually creating emissions by that activity. And then the second set would be like reduction. You reduce your current emissions. So this is your current emissions right now, and then you do an activity to reduce your emissions, then you earn also a credit. And then in the forestry sector, that's also similar. Like for example, in the the forestry and land use sector, for example, if you use an agriculture technology that minimizes the use, let's say, of fertilizer or burning of fields, you are reducing your emissions. So you're not completely removing emissions because when you do farming, there will still be emissions, but when you change like a methodology or an approach to your farming or agriculture or sustainable land use management, then you're reducing that emissions and then you get credits from that activity. And then the third piece is what we call carbon removal. So the removals is that you are actually putting capacity to sequester more carbon or absorb more carbon from the atmosphere. And you do this through restoration or reforestation, right? For example, if there's an area with no trees, therefore there's no more capacity to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and you plant those trees through tree planting or restoration activities, you are actually removing carbon. So the activities within our protected areas can be in these three types of carbon credits that can be generated: avoidance, reduction, or removals. And when you and carbon projects, this is how usually it's done. So the market, to generate those credits actually follows these like four major steps. So first, you develop a project, right? For example, the project is the activity in slide one. So my project, let's say, is a carbon removal project. So I will plant 10,000 trees, and this will remove X number of gigatons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So that's my project. And then the second step is verification and certification. You need a third party to verify, to make sure that you have implemented your activity, that you have actually planted those trees, and because you planted those trees, you were able to generate this number of carbon that you have removed. And then once the third party verification, the standard holder like Terra or Gold Standard or Plan Vivo, there's so many standards, they issue those credits. Like they now tell you, they give you a piece of paper, tell you that, yes, you planted those 10,000 trees, it's verified, therefore, this is the number of carbon credits you have. And that piece of paper is what is being traded and being retired. So the difference between trading and retire, so when traded is that you sell those piece of paper, for, that's why investors come in the carbon market, in the carbon finance, because they can cover the cost of project development, verification, all the way to credits. And then they take the credit certificates, and then they would sell it for like a markup price, right, to earn a profit, so that they have the money to pay the investor or the capitalist of the one who provided the capital money to do project development, verification, and credits. So that's trading. Like you sell those piece of paper. I don't know how many, times it's being sold or traded or consolidated like a commodity. Retirement is when you actually use those credit to offset. So if I'm a company and I buy those piece of paper, the credit, and then I will use that to report to the government that, with this piece of paper, I'm offsetting. So for example, my company is emitting this number of tons of carbon. I will use this paper to tell the government that I've already paid for my obligation to the earth by to the planet by buying this carbon credit. So that's retirement, meaning once it's retired, the certificate, you can no longer claim it, you can no longer sell it, you can no longer transfer it because its value of taking those carbon from the atmosphere has already been used through an offset activity. So I'm sharing this basic because as a reaction to the presentation, there are some needed reframing, right? So these two slides are usually, that's the basic, how carbon credits work, how the market is already operating at the moment. And this is something that we at Conservation International were trying to reframe it in a way that would make it more inclusive, more long-term and sustainable. So I mean, you've already seen that there are so many project developers that are coming into the country, going to the protected areas, going to the DNR, offering, we will develop a project, on carbon, things like that. So it's still like third party project development. So the reframing that we are trying to shift away is more on positioning protected areas within jurisdictional carbon systems. And why is that? What's the difference? With jurisdictional carbon systems, going back to this diagram, the one that is going to do the project development verification, who owns the credits and then trade it, like sell it, would be a jurisdiction. So it can be a government. So it can be the national government, can be the city government, can be the municipal government, as long as they have the jurisdiction towards that land, towards that natural resource. And why is that, the protected areas would be like a good candidate for jurisdictional carbon systems? Because protected areas, they are important for like national level benefits, right? Because the protected areas, they are vital in avoiding emissions, they maintain carbon stocks, they provide resilience in many communities, not just like one jurisdiction, like one city or barangay. So protected areas are really a good opportunity where jurisdictions like the government can really develop it into like a carbon financing. And then with jurisdictional systems, it improves the governance, right? Because with jurisdictional, you cannot argue with the government running the project. So, for example, if it's a protected area, then there is a management board, and there's no more argument like, what's the whose jurisdiction is this or that. There will be better coordination. Leakage is something that you avoid emissions in one place, but you also created emissions in the other place. So that's not that's a bad project design, right? So So with jurisdictional, there will be better integration also with our national climate goals like the NDC. And then with jurisdictional carbon systems, it will be like stable and long term. And one of the major topics in carbon credits or carbon finance is the issue of permanence. So because the issue of permanence is this, like if I planted those trees and then plant them now, and then I earn the credits, and then 10 years from now, I will cut those trees and, emits GHG. So what's the purpose of the money that I put to plant those trees? Because we need permanent solutions if we want to change the situation in climate change, right? There cannot be like a short-term solutions that we absorb carbon right now, 10 years from 10 years straight, we absorb carbon, and then after 10 years, we emit carbon again. So it's not going to solve our climate solution. So with the Vera standards, when they say permanence, it should be at least 40 years to 100 years, that there is a commitment that whoever runs the project, it has to be permanent. No? And when you say permanent, it is 40 years to 100 years. So this is why the constitutional limitation of the Philippines, where the DNR or the Philippine government can only give the right to a land to a third party, like a private individual, for 25 years, renewable for another 25 years. So that's like a maximum of 50 years. It might not qualify as permanence. But if the government is the one who actually runs the project, owns the project, then there's no question it's permanent, right? Because, the protected areas is the jurisdiction of the national government. It's the jurisdiction of we provided by the NIPAS law. So there is, we can demonstrate that the activities within that carbon project within that protected areas will be much long term and more secure than giving it to third party agencies or corporations who would then like run the projects for a maximum of 50 years. So with long term horizon, like long term yung horizon, it will open up more financing opportunities because investments, they require long term horizons, so that there will be like like return of that investment. And with jurisdictional carbon system, we can be very strategic with our methodologies. As I've said, we can align many things. We can reduce number of transactions. If there is like one entity jurisdiction that supervises or manages the carbon financing project. And and that's also true. Like for example, in many countries in the Southeast Asia, government now are taking a more central role in the carbon market. So, for example, recently the Philippine government, Singapore government, they signed an agreement that the Philippine government will sell carbon credits to the Singapore government. So it's now a government development. But what's happening in the Philippines is that the government will still depend on projects like third-party projects to generate those credits. And our position, CIs, would be better if it's going to be the government who is going to do an actual, restoration, forest protection, and then generate those credits. It will be like a government-owned initiative, and then whatever credits that generated, that's what they're going to sell or trade with the other countries where we have like a deal, Singapore, Article 6, or with Japan, with the joint crediting mechanism. So yeah, so there's like a lot of shift in terms of towards more government-led frameworks, manages long-term risks, more inclusion, more transparent. Because as I've said, if it's going to be the government right now, the government plays support more like a referee. There are so many players in the carbon market, like there's Vera, there are carbon developers, there's NGOs like CI, each are doing their own thing in the carbon market space in the Philippines, and the government sort of like a referee, more like a referee on set the rules. So what we're saying is that the government should be able to lead, coordinate the whole thing, right? You would be able to tell like these are the priority sites for carbon finance, these are the areas that we should be doing, and then government puts its like power to really manage our natural resources in partnership with third party developers and organizations like CI and local communities to be able to implement those activities that would generate carbon credits. So now, there are unique features in the Philippines. When you talk about carbon projects in the Philippines, even if the project is private project like, third-party projects or a government jurisdictional projects, there are still like a lot of questions in terms of needs clarification. So one of that is the indigenous peoples. Like, how does the indigenous peoples fit into this carbon finance? And this is something that we always engage with the DNR and with the NCIP to find, a clearer definition of how the indigenous peoples and local communities participate or benefit from this carbon finance in the protected areas. And I've shown you the screen. It's not just because they are indigenous peoples why they should benefit. No, indigenous peoples, they bring a lot of value into the carbon. The indigenous peoples, they bring a lot of, success. If we engage them, there will be more success possibility in our project. So, there will be stewardship, their traditional knowledge system is important. They can also we can also make sure that by working with indigenous peoples, we can make sure that the benefit really goes to the communities, like what are the priority development needs of the community so that they can, develop socioeconomically, not just like receive uh, token, money from these projects, but really financing that would really help these indigenous communities. And so these are some of the areas where some opportunities where we need to do some work. So one would be carbon rights clarity. So because in the Philippines, there's like a lot of overlaps in terms of claim, like who owns the carbon in the Philippines, the rights. There is a pending bill in Congress that tries to define the carbon rights, but it's still a bill. So I just give you a scenario in a protected area. So the DNR has the right over the protected area, right, as the mandated agency for NIPAS. But the IPRA, the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, also puts recognition of the rights of indigenous people since time immemorial, like even before the DNR existed. They have the right over their land. But there's also a law on minerals, like the mines, the minerals under the ground, not the trees. Um, so there are overlapping. That's the reason why we can see mining activity within protected areas because of those loopholes in terms of which right is higher over the other rights. So I think this is something that we need to clarify, need to make sure that the government will need to have a policy in terms of clearly defining and preventing those conflicts and overlaps. And then second is free and prior consent, which is an essential commitment we have for indigenous people's engagement, governance frameworks and dispute resolution. This is important because, as I said, there are a lot of overlaps within protected areas. So we need to make sure that our governance is inclusive, make sure that all voices are considered, and that there is a mechanism for dispute resolution or for, like settling different conflicts and disputes. And then finally, benefits of early clarity, like uh, once these are clear, then for investor, they would be very interested to come in because now it's very clear. Investors, they don't put their money in a high risk initiative, right? When there are a lot of questions and uncertainty, like they're not very sure about who owns the land, who owns the trees, how the benefits are shared. The investment money would not come in because there's just a lot of uncertainty. And then finally is on benefit sharing. So I think this is something that we need to always consider in all of our projects, like what are the long-term community priorities, how there is transparency, because sometimes this is the challenge we have. We can observe, and I think the carbon market is fixing this. In That's why we have high integrity principles, because there are so many instances in the early days of carbon projects where the developers, they're not being very transparent. No, they're only taking, like, telling the communities this is how much money is made. But as I've told you, there are trading, right? They're going to sell it for a profit, how many times they would mark up the price. So the final price of that credit, sometimes it's not very transparent to the communities. So parang it's like how our commodities, right? They buy it low price at the community level, but they sell it like very high with a huge margin, and then there's no clear like benefit from that huge margin going back to the communities. So these are some of the I think critical questions that, and we are already working on this. I believe the DNR, NCIP, and the development partners of the government are putting together policies and guidelines to make sure that the benefits are really equitable and transparently being discussed with indigenous communities and with local communities. And finally, for protected areas, I think these are the importance for, important use case. Right? Why do we need money for protected areas? So one is, we need money for obvious reason, to improve management, we need to improve enforcement, but it also incentivizes sustainable planning, right? Because, there will be no investment if there is no long-term plan. So it incentivizes. So it's going to encourage protected area managers to think long-term. And because they're thinking long-term, then they can get the financing that they need. So it incentivizes sustainable long-term planning. It safeguards against conflicts with money when there is sustainable financing within the protected area, everybody is benefiting from that, and nobody is like, benefiting more or less. And then there is cross-sector coordination, and you have sustainable funding flowing into the protected areas. But the problem is that we should not just be depending on carbon finance because of its limitations. So carbon finance, it's market driven. So sometimes the price is high, sometimes the price is very low, and sometimes the revenue from the sales of those credits doesn't really cover the cost of the activities of protecting those forests. So we need to think about other financing mechanisms for the protected areas, not just carbon. So one would be nature-based financing like biodiversity credits, maybe payment for ecosystem services, but we usually do that for protected areas with watersheds. We can do blended finance, like, for example, in the Mount Mantalingahan Protected Landscape, CI, we have established like a conservation trust fund, like an endowment fund for Mount Mantalingahan, initial capital that we can invest and then grow into the capital market. So we need to think about different ways of bringing finance to the protected area. So not just the usual, users fee and other forms of fees and fines and penalties that the ENIPAS has provided to the protected areas. Now we need to, because those are not enough, no, those are not sufficient. Need to diversify our financing mechanisms. And then finally, this is the last slide. So what do we need to make sure that the success of our not protected areas need to, sustain investment is an important piece for our protected areas, and carbon finance is a one mechanism that would ensure long-term investment. As I said, when you go into a carbon finance project, it is long-term, 40 years to 100 years. If you cannot demonstrate that, you might not get those credits. So, so it's one option for long-term financing. And also the importance of capacity building, make sure that everybody is aware of these initiatives. People have the capacity to engage. There is transparency and more equitable bargaining. So the decision making process should be very transparent. And then, policy improvement is always part and parcel of developing like a carbon financing um, you know, mechanism for our protected areas. So I'll stop there. And again, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'd be happy to respond to our questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Wilson, and thank you for sharing that years of rich insights and for elaborating how carbon financing actually works. I think as much as we want to advocate and advance carbon financing in the Philippines for our forests, the realities of this confounding challenges and problems on in the ground implementation is real. I mean, just as how you have described it. And but honestly, I still have this hope that just as how the neighboring countries advance in their carbon financing, we still have this hope, just as what you have mentioned. If the Philippine government will take the role, will lead us into this, that could be our game changer. And if we do empower our communities, especially our IPs, our indigenous peoples, this could immensely change the landscape for our forest. Thank you, Sir Wilson, for sharing that. And next to our equally seasoned expert in the field, let us hear the valuable perspective of Forester Anselmo Cabrera of the Caraga Carbon Development Incorporated for the Project Caraga initiative. Sir Anselmo?
Yeah, good afternoon. I'll be sharing my screen. Okay, I think for the interest of time, I'll be sort of limiting my presentation to three major reactions to the presentation. Firstly, I commend the Biodiversity Management Bureau for all the efforts you're doing on biodiversity and protected area management in the country. Definitely, I was once part of the effort for some of the protected area management boards, especially in the north and somewhere in the Visayas. There are a lot of topics to discuss or to react on related to carbon or carbon financing. And I think the previous presenter, Sir Wilson, already covered a lot of topics related to some risk related to implementation of the carbon project in the Philippines and other parts of the globe. But this presentation of mine is more on the reflections I have in implementing Project Caraga. This is a RED Plus project being implemented in the Caraga region, and practically it covers 100,000 hectares of prevailing natural forest. So, yeah, we thank you, BMB, for now looking at the protected areas, also part of the potential climate action uh, strategy to be able to also address sort of on a more circular way biodiversity conservation as well as protected area management in general using the carbon finance. So I have three major topics that I would like to share as a reactions to the presentation. Of course, the financing gap, it's very clear that currently the NIPAS is fully dependent on government financing. I think not much are being provided under the IFAP and some from the PES mechanism maybe. And we are now exploring other potential area by which financing can be sustained for all the protected areas. I think for sometime in 2012, in one presentation made by PNB, I think the financing gap is at 60% or 70%, uh, if I'm not mistaken. But nonetheless, yes, there's a huge financing gap that we need to attend to. So I think the implementability of a carbon project inside the protected areas should be based on our readiness. And we should be able to reflect on ourselves, especially the government, and in particular here, BMB being the lead entity or agency implementing protected areas in the country, to be able to have all these requirements, especially on the monitoring, reporting, and verification system. Some policy. I think we already have the policy issued last February, but it's not enough. It's only for the voluntary carbon market. But we are also waiting for the compliance market under Article 6 and Article 6.2. And the investor's pathway. So this is a huge learning from our end with regards to having the private investor investing in a RED Plus project, especially show that if the government is not ready, then risk is too high, and investors' fatigue is something that are also being part of the risk to be able to sustain the implementation of a carbon project. So with regards to financing challenge, I think our presenter already provided where are the gaps in terms of the financing. And currently, we have mentioned about the government dependence, very limited income or revenue generation from the IFAP, and I think some effort on restoration costs that we need to do in some protected areas that are already hugely altered. And of course, it's also aggravated by the climate impacts, which require more financing needs and down the line, of course. So here, we're looking at carbon finance can possibly or potentially bridge the gap, but only if all these systems are in place. For example, in payment for ecosystem services, we can also implement this in a watershed, for example. Biodiversity credits can also be looked upon as one of the potential sources of credits and the carbon offsets. So it should be designed to be transparent, equitable, and investor ready. So the basic questions that we can always ask is related to the certainty of revenue, especially show if the private investor is the one putting on money to be able to implement a carbon project. And of course, related to that is the how do we manage risk. I think this is the role of the government to be able to reduce or eliminate the risk for the investors to be for the project to be more palatable to the private investors and other investors as well. And the benefit sharing, I think it was mentioned a while ago. How do we define benefit sharing, especially benefit sharing between the proponent and the owner of the land? So in our case, we have the IPs here, and we have defined the benefit sharing based on the revenue that will be generated from the carbon sales. And the financial models. I think it should be part of the overall feasibility of the project to really come up with the right or good mix of financial model that can be credible enough to be able to sustain the project. In terms of being ready, I think the BMB, I don't know if it's already part of your strategic action plan. I haven't read the strategic action plan, but nonetheless, we can also look at the possibly the short-term, medium-term, and long-term preparation. What do we need to have in terms of preparing for carbon projects to be implemented inside that protected area? So I've highlighted this a few of them, but I think core to this is to be able to come up with pilot showcase project at the short term. But before we can do that, even we need to have a sort of complete somehow working mechanism that we can pilot test to be able to document all the lessons that we'll get from implementing that project. So the MRB system should always be part of the mechanism, and the policy framework. We have started it with the voluntary carbon market, and we're still waiting for the compliance market. But hopefully, all these things will be come into fruition in the near term. And down the line, for long term, I think we should be able to integrate all conservation finance, the carbon financing in the overall conservation financing strategy for protected areas. So I think it was also discussed who really invests in the carbon projects. So I think for the first one, the risk is more on the private sector investments because they will shoulder all the upfront cost of feasibility assessment and implementation. So it takes for them initial implementation will take around 3 to 5 years to get the first vintage or the first credit, and then I think recoupment based on the current price of from in the carbon market of the under the voluntary mechanism is only around a max of $3 to $5. So high risk, but they will not be able to recoup the investments in the near term. So for others, these are some sort of investors who really want to just contribute to the impacts of carbon project. And we are looking at development partners and donor. I think they can always fund the early stage of developing and implementing the project. And then I think it's coming more now, especially with the UNDP model, the blended finance structure. So we should look at all these things to be able to mix whatever we can use in combination to fund the project. And of course, all these projects, I think it was also discussed, the potential project is red ARR and bio credits. So there are methodologies that needs to be followed, complex ones. I think for CI, they have already experienced implementing carbon project in part of Palawan. I was also following that. And of course, our own experiences is that Red Plus project, especially the methodology being used by Vera and other mechanisms are very complex, from the baselining to the actual MRB and monitoring and even tracking the credits. Same is true with the ARR. I haven't studied carefully the bio credits, but I think it's becoming now one of the potential for to get the credits on implementing biodiversity projects. So policy challenges in the restoration agreement, I think this is based on the first presentation, of course. With regards to restoration agreement, 25-year term can automatically be renewable if we want to follow the permanence principle being implemented under the carbon project. Of course, we can always look at other systems, the PES, the carbon offsets and biodiversity credits, but deeply we should also be looking at the benefit sharing mechanism, especially between the proponent and the owner of the land, and how the PAMBI and PASO can be part of the overall mix of implementing or governing the carbon project inside the protected area. And the risk to investor will always be the policy, especially if it's unstable. So in our case, I think some of the investors now, especially for the Red Plus project like ours, are really finding it difficult to move forward in a way that they want it to be in terms of the timeline because of we don't have enough policy to really support local markets as well as the implementation of Article 6 and Article 6.2. And the overlapping jurisdictions, I think it also is part of our experience that we find it very difficult to implement in protected area that overlaps with the IPDAT because, of course, the Protected Area Management Board insists on their mandate, but of course, the IPs are also looking at that they have the NIPAS Act to support their rights. So a lot of issues that is related to this, and I think this is one thing that it should be looked upon deeply by both the NCIP and the Biodiversity Management Bureau. And related to that, the tenure security, especially for other tenural instrument inside the protected area, there are a lot of overlapping. If there is a protected area, there is a Burma, and there is an ancestral domain. Those are things that we need to look deeply into and address the issue and anticipate how can we harmonize all these things inside one landscape. MRB, so we don't have it yet. I think we can also review other systems that are existing that can be a reference for the Biodiversity Management Bureau to look at on how we will develop our MRB system for protected areas. And of course, social aspect is always one of the biggest element that we should safeguard in implementing the carbon projects being required in all of the mechanisms. So in closing, the future of Philippine protected areas through carbon finance has its own potential. It may not be too bright, but conditional on addressing three critical requirements: the transparency and equitable mechanisms. I think we should design carbon offset, PES, and biodiversity credits framework that investor can trust with independent MRB and very clear benefit sharing. Early MRB and co-benefit integration, soon it should be done. And policy consistency and tenure clarity, again, because of the overlapping claims in one landscape, we have a problem of how we should implement or govern the land and then implement the project. So I think that's all from my end. I just highlighted the key points that I think are more relevant, reflecting on the experiences that we have on Project Caraga.
Thank you, Sir Anselmo, for adding depth to our discussion. I was reminded of the quote, when the rubber meets the road. Yes, there are a lot of potentials with carbon, but we still need to be grounded and realistic in terms of our implementation. We do not want to repeat the same mistakes and pitfalls that we had in the past. But at the same time, we do not want to be blinded by the opportunities that we now have as we advance towards the carbon roadmap that was prepared by the Philippine government. So with the interest of time, I'm afraid we will not be having our open forum for this time, but we have taken note of your questions and we will respond to you after the webinar. So now let us hear very quickly a feedback or insight from the Climate Change Action Program from Dr. Philip Gizol, the CCAP program leader. Sir Philip?
Okay, sorry, I have some difficulty to find the sound. So I prepared some slide, but so many things have been said, and we don't have much time. I would like first to thank the previous speakers because a lot of things have been said. I would like to emphasize on one point, maybe instead of presenting what I prepare. You know, so far in Philippines, we talk a lot about voluntary carbon market. I would like, and the last speaker talk about compliance, the need that the government step in, and we need to avoid double counting. And he mentioned Article 6.2, the bilateral agreements, and I would like to remind that at the beginning, when RED Plus start, it was very complicated, and it has been decided to do some pilot project, and it is where the voluntary carbon market step in, and it become a kind of standard. But the problem is there is issues behind. It has been really criticized because of the risk of double counting, and there is a need for the government to control the carbon, because the government engage itself in the NDC. And if some private company is taking the low-hanging fruits, it's bad for the government. So the government has to control that, and he has to be sure that carbon is not sold 2 times. It is his responsibility. So it's why we are talking again, while at the beginning of RED Plus, we moved to the voluntary carbon market. We are going back now to the compliance market. So that doesn't mean the voluntary carbon market will disappear overnight, but we should have that in mind. And another reason it is the compliance market, the credits will be much higher than in a voluntary carbon market. So I wanted to emphasize on this, and that means there is also a need to regroup maybe the PAs, and we have not talked about this point today, is why I take only this one. You know, because we need to have a nested project instead of to have individual project or jurisdictional project, but large, that help to have leakage, for instance, and you may have different kind of ideas for regrouping PAs. It could be to take all the PAs of Philippines, or to take some kind of PAs. But one idea could be to take all the PAs within a kind of eco-region. I mean, like Palawan, all the PAs in Palawan, or Sierra Madre, all the PAs in Sierra Madre, because that have sense. It could be jurisdictional in the same time. And this ecoregion has a specific function, mostly biodiversity for Palawan is obvious, but also the control of water for the Sierra Madre, protection against the typhoon, or all these things, which are important for the Philippines. So in a way, when people will buy this carbon, they will know that it will be a kind of as blend finance. It could be for biodiversity and carbon, for different things, payment for environmental services like water and carbon. So maybe this is a kind of discussion we may have to see what kind of system should be good to put together some PAs, to regroup the PAs to go towards more compliance market. Yeah. So I have also many other questions, but I got a lot of answer today. So we will have other opportunity to discuss all this. But I don't know if you want to react to this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Philip. So I think one of the word that I could summarize the presentations earlier is being creative. So although we have a lot of struggles or challenges in terms of carbon financing implementation, we have to be creative because there is still potential and hope for this. So once again, thank you, Sir Reneo, Sir Wilson, Sir Anselmo, Sir Philip, and to our highly engaged participants. And at this moment, we'd like to take this opportunity to express our heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished speaker and reactors. So a certificate of appreciation is awarded to Mr. Reneo Vicente, Mr. Wilson Barbon, and Mr. Anselmo Cabrera. So once again, thank you so much for being such an important part of today's success. And who knows, we can have another opportunity, another webinar to have um, an extended time to discuss this interesting opportunity for carbon financing. So to close this session, let's watch and hear some reflections from our beloved UPLB-INREM Director, Dr. Maricel Villamayor.
Good afternoon, everyone. As we close this episode of INREM 360, I would like to express my deep gratitude to our speaker, Mr. Reneo Vicente, OIC Chief of the Community Management and Sustainable Financing Section of the Biodiversity Management Bureau. Thank you, Mr. Vicente, for that very timely and insightful presentation on the future of Philippine protected areas through carbon finance. You clearly laid out a reality that conservation cannot run on goodwill and government corporations alone. The financing gap is real, but so are the opportunities, especially from forest restoration, biodiversity credits, and blended finance. I also want to thank our voices on the ground, our panel members, Mr. Wilson Bourbon from Conservation International and Mr. Anselmo Cabrera from Project Caraga, who helped us dig deeper into the different dimensions of carbon finance. Your reflections reminded all of us that carbon readiness is much more about measuring peace. Thank you also to our loyal INREM 360 participants as well as the new ones. We appreciate your tremendous support and continued engagement with us, and I hope this new episode brought you practical insights you can bring back to your work or any related initiative. Thank you also to the INREM TWG members who are here, and of course to the hardworking INREM staff who made this another episode possible, especially through the CCCAP project. As the new director of INREM, rest assured that we will continue to create more spaces for learning and provide a platform where science meets practice. Thank you and see you on the next INREM 360 episode. Good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Asel, for that meaningful
Thank
message.
you.
Good
Apologies, we
afternoon.
have extended, but we did have a thought-provoking discussion, and hopefully we can sustain this dialogue and together advance the carbon financing in our Philippine PAs. In our continuous effort to improve our service, we'd love to know your feedback on today's webinar, particularly on what went well and on how we can further improve our future episodes. So you may access the evaluation form by scanning the QR code on your screens or by clicking the link in the chat box. So finally, watch out for the upcoming INREM 360 episodes. So for this June, we will have the role of nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches in climate resilience building, perspectives from Brazil and the Philippines. So details will be posted in our social media pages. So the next one will be on August 24, and that will be in celebration of the ASEAN month. So one ASEAN ecosystem harnessing nature-based solutions for resilience, food security, biodiversity, and transboundary integration. So we look forward to the same participation and same activeness of our participants to this upcoming webinars. So for more details, please visit inrem.cfnr.uplb.edu.ph or follow us on our Facebook and YouTube accounts. And what a great way to end this day. So from the fields of the Philippines to your screens around the world, thank you once again for being part of this webinar. And yes, it has been a day. So Until the next episode this coming Thursday and the coming months rather, let us keep co-creating knowledge, crossing disciplines, and building futures that thrive in nature. Again, this is Wella Katucha, and this has been the INREM 360.